here to share with you what we discovered during the last year studying the monastery. We are very happy. This event, we were waiting to organize something like that. We took the opportunity that today is the International UNESCO Day for Monuments and Sites. So we decided to celebrate it here on one of the UNESCO sites of Cyprus with you. And we are really glad that had the support of the British High Commission and of course, the village of Kalpanagiotis and all the community that have been really supportive and enthusiastic about this event.
And the Department of Antiquities?
Yes, of course. And the Bishopric of Morphu, which we collaborate, and of course we are sharing our results, and we're just in this exchange with them and supporting each other. So I would leave the floor now to the president of the village of Kalpanagiotis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 18th of April has been defined by UNESCO and the International Council of Monuments and Sites, ICOMOS, as the International Day for Monuments and Sites. Kalpanagiotis is a community with many attractions to the visitor and at the same time with a rich cultural heritage. The most significant of all of our monuments is a place we are standing here today, the beautiful and historic monastery of St. John Lampadistis. In 1985, the monastery was inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. We feel very humbled and honored in the selection of our St. John for celebrating the International Day for Monuments and Sites. We would like to welcome you to our village and deeply thank you for choosing us. We are at your full disposal for anything you need during your stay here, as well as for any future events that you might want to organize in Kalpanagiotis. Welcome once again, and our best wishes for a successful event. Thank you very much.
Okay, of course.
From
Bishopric
Father.
of Morphu.
Yeah.
Okay, so
From the bishopric.
On behalf of our Metropolitan Bishop of Morphu Neophylos, warm welcome, the best wishes and blessings, and of course the best of luck in your future research and events like this one. And of course, on my behalf of the main guardian of this place, most of you are known for me, and I welcome you again here, and the others for welcome, and let's enjoy the environment of the Holy Monastery of St. John Lampadistis. And of course, I would like to add that St. John loves all the pilgrims and tourists coming here. Best of luck, and Christos.
Kalimera, good night and good morning. Kiriproedrei, to the representatives of the monastery, director, everybody. I always say it's a great pleasure. It's not a great pleasure. It's absolutely fantastic to be here in this site to celebrate the UNESCO Day of Monuments and Sites, our World Heritage Day. It's been going since, I think, 1982 to raise awareness of and appreciation for our cultural heritage and fantastic sites like this. It also is a moment for us to remember the amount of work that goes into preserving our cultural heritage, which is phenomenal all around the world, and also here in Cyprus, with the sites that we have, but also the sheer number of sites that Cyprus has to offer. These monuments and sites are, they enrich the lives of all the generations that come after them. They're our memories from our school trips and our day trips. They're the highlights of our holidays. but they're much more than that. They're the chapters in our shared, unique story of humankind. If we lose them, we lose a part of ourselves. If we fail to understand them, we fail to understand a key part of our story, of where we're coming from. So today is a special day to not just appreciate these sites, but understand their importance, understand their meaning, and understand all the work that many people, including many of you here, put into preserving them. Our responsibility for cultural heritage is one of the many links that we have between the UK and Cyprus. In the UK, we have big UNESCO sites like Stonehenge, like the House of Parliament. We have lesser known ones like the Derwent Valley Mills. Just as here in Cyprus, we have everything from the Tomb of the Kings to Salamis, from Kition to Kurion, and everything in between, including this incredible site here in the heart of the island. It's no surprise that Cyprus has so many of these sites. Its history, for thousands of years, has been a crossroads of culture. Our ties are not just historical; they're also very practical. They're very real. In recent years, excavations in Akrotiri with a team from the University of Leicester have been excavating the remains of what could be one of the best preserved ancient ports in the Mediterranean. Currently, we have teams from the University of Edinburgh in Kissonerga and Souski-Laona in Paphos district. We have, they're also in Plastio in Limassol district. We have Lindy Crew of Carry leading the University of Manchester team, also in Kissonerga. University of East Anglia at Kalavassos in Larnaca district, and team from University of Wales Lampeter in Aradiu in Nicosia district. So those historic UK-Cyprus ties are also very much with us today, preserving, developing our understanding of all the sites all across the island. So it's a real privilege, a real pleasure to be here today. I'm particularly excited to be learning a bit about graffiti and the role of historic graffiti, to get an insight into the real lives of people who passed here before us, so we can really understand the history of this place, what it meant to those who came here before us. So thank you to APAC Labs and Cyprus Institute. Thank you to the beautiful village of Kalapangiotis. I'm always up for a visit here. Any excuse to come here is fantastic. To the bishopric and everyone here who's celebrating the day in probably the best way we can celebrate the UNESCO World Heritage Day. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to open this visit, and because for many reasons the different posters you see here are parts of our specialty in our laboratory, and give some data different with data which has been given by the art historians. And what is interesting and what you will see that we can build together more comprehensive history of building thanks to the results which have been achieved. The second thing, I will be very brief. I'm very pleased to open such an event, and thanks to Mia who organized it, because I think that all these results have to be given to a general public, and it's part what I call cultural diplomacy. That means that culture can bind all the people together. I think cultural diplomacy was one of the themes which has been developed in a project. We worked with Nicolas and Sorin, who is here, later a few days ago, and we are crossing the fingers that this project will be approved by the European Community. But I think one of this main feature of this project is to have all together the different disciplines in front of cultural heritage artifacts, what we call augmented art objects. And with all the data should be shared
and propose to everyone, to the owners, of course, of the objects, but also for the community and the public. So you will see it's a real, like a first trial for such an event, and it will be interesting for all of you, I hope. Thank you for being here.
Faculties. I'm associate professor at the Cyprus Institute. My background is in Byzantine studies, Byzantine art and architecture. So what we are going to share with you today, and of course I want to thank everybody who has been here organizing this, but also the community of Kalovanagiotis and the village for hosting us. Thank you for the collaboration for the British High Commission. Thank you to the Bishop of Morpho, and of course the Department of Antiquities, who has been giving us generous access to a monument of this caliber. So what we're going to do today is I will offer a very brief introduction to the history, the art, and share with you why I think this is such an important UNESCO monument. And then you will see different perspectives from members of our team, scientists, chemists, digital experts, graffiti experts, who have all been contributing their own expertise to uncover different layers and different aspects of a layered historic monument like the Monastery of St. John Lampadistis. So what I want us to keep from what is important here is that everything around this monument has to do with the concept of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage that connects the tradition and the presence of this monument at this corner of the Cypriot landscape all the way back to antiquity, and actually to the moment that Christianity is spreading through the island. And actually it's this tradition that of the passage of Paul and Barnabas on their journey across Cyprus, spreading the word of the new religion, and the local tradition that identifies this water stream down there with the location where when a local Saint Heraclius was baptized, that connects and locates this monastery in the landscape of this ravine of the Setrachos river. So that goes back centuries. Most probably they stopped here because down there, and still there is a healing fountain, healing water, sulfur water that is down there. You can actually visit it. Most probably there was something there all the way in antiquity that was a place where local communities would connect, and that's why Paul and Barnabas made this one of their destinations as they were crossing the Troodos on their way to the south coast of Cyprus. They baptized Heraclius, who becomes one of the leaders of the early Christian Cypriot church, and it is that legacy that then explains why the first Byzantine building that was constructed in this location sometime in the 11th century was dedicated to Saint Heraclius. And this is the main church of this church complex, which is comprised of 3 buildings, which we are going to talk to you about. So the very first building here was a Byzantine crossing square, typical domed church dedicated to that early Christian saint, making an effort to connect the 11th century Byzantine rule of the island with those early Christian traditions, legitimizing the continuity, bridging periods of Byzantine control, because in the intermediate there was a period of ambiguous rule between the Byzantines and the Arabs. There was a little bit of instability on the island, and Byzantium then comes back in the 10th, 11th, and 12th centuries, investing in the island, and one of the things that they invested most was monasteries. They were investing more in cultural institutions instead, I would even say, to military. They knew that strengthening the Byzantine culture on the island would be an investment that will last for centuries, and we are still here. And this is a standing monastery. This is a monastery that has preserved its glory, and it's a point of reference for local communities in this part of the island. The other thing that is important is that because this was such an important monastery that had received so much investment, the art that you will experience inside the church is of a very, very high quality and representative of the various influences through Cyprus. So in a way, you get a small encyclopedia of Byzantine and medieval art of the Eastern Mediterranean in this little corner of the Cypriot landscape. You have wall paintings that date all the way to the 12th century, 13th century, 14th, and then highlights from the Venetian period at the beginning of the 16th century. The wall paintings that you will see at the far end that are related to more or less the passage of Italian Renaissance from the island. An important highlight following the legacy of Heraclidios is that then the monastery and the community become connected with a very important local saint, and that's Saint John Lampadistis. This was a local man, we will hear more about him later, but he was a local saint, a healing saint who was buried, and then his relic becomes a point of reference for pilgrims that come all the way to Asia Minor, as we will hear from our colleagues, and beyond. So the church and the monastery become associated and are dedicated, and now it's known as the Monastery of St. John Lampadistis, while maintaining the legacy of St. Heraclidios in the main church. So this is why, and you will see the relic, and also talking about a Byzantine building. What is kind of also different from the other 10 UNESCO churches is that here it's the only example where you really get a sense of how these monasteries function. It's the whole monastic complex is preserved. You have this beautiful monastic courtyard organized to essentially allow entry into the focus of the life of this monastery and its visitors. It's now organized in a, let's say, south to north axis, not a typical west to east, because everything is about allowing pilgrims to head to where the relic of St. John Lampadistis is, and this is and to worship that. Everything is organized around that effort. When you go to the other, some of you who may have visited the other churches, you see only solitary chapels preserved. Sometimes some buildings are there, but this is like a beautifully well enclosed monastic complex with various buildings accommodating through time the various needs of the monastic community. Usually this is this wing looking down to the ravine cooler is where most of the cells, of the monastic cells were, and other activities where the bishop, so the visiting bishop of the abbot resided, and this wing was more utilitarian. You have the remnants of the mill there, the kitchen, the furnace, and the refectory. So this is in a nutshell how one could and should be experiencing this building. Let's first start with the first stop outside the monastery, where we hear from our colleagues Sorin and Lucharita.
This multi-layering and pilgrims dictates us what to do and which kind of methods we want to use in order to document the church, its materiality, its function, and its people. So what you see here in this place, we were conducting 3D documentation. So we captured the geometry of the place, the materiality, but also in terms of what people were doing inside. So what we want to have is throughout digital material that helps us further on for the conservation, preservation, and valorization of the church. And this kind of work can be done when we are integrating digital methods, analytical methods, chemistry, physics, but also social sciences and humanities. It's very important, and any kind of heritage building, monument, site, is preserved together with the community and for the communities. So you can, in this case here, when you look around, there are a lot of materials, stone, you will see inside a lot of colors, there is wood. Each one of them is exposed to different types of hazards and different types of dangers. So one of the first things that we have to do is to understand exactly what we are dealing with. What do we have inside? If you look here, Nicholas mentioned the 3 churches. So this is what you see here, and also in the 3D models, the 3 churches with the roof removed. We need to understand not the multi-layers, because each one relates to the other in a different way. And not always we have clear these relationships. This is why we need to document with all kinds of tools, and you will see inside more of these tools. You see there also in the 3D model different layers, different periods, different views of the church itself. Go more. So one of the first things that we do after we analyze and we document is to, you don't see it from here, but to try to understand which are the factors, which are the agents that have a most dramatic impact on the monument itself. Is it humidity? Is it strong winds? Is it strong rain? Why people decided to build such a huge roof? If you look outside, you don't really think there is a need for such a very massive construction. So why they did it? And how do we preserve it? So this is what we are trying to understand here, and then see through modeling and simulations what if scenarios. What would happen if there is more rain? What happens if there is more humidity inside the church? Which kind of damages we may expect to have? So these are the various steps of our work that we are doing in order to assess this kind of impact. And I would like to just go at the end. So these are this is a very typical way how we are working, trying to separate each element and then see how each element is integrated with another one in terms of materiality, in terms of shape, in terms also of the behavior of people inside. When you will go inside, you will see there are more open spaces, there are closer spaces, more people, less people. Each one of them has a different impact on the environment inside the church. So this is just an example to introduce you to the first station that you will see here inside. Chemical analysis on the frescoes themselves and how they were made, their state of conservation, the graffiti that Mia will talk a lot about them, and Nicolette will also show some more detailed analysis that she has been doing. You want to mention something here?
So, well, the last thing that we would like
Lucia
to mention
is a PhD student in our group, by the way. My name is Sorin. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself.
So all this information that we are gathering are useful in order to have a better conservation, preservation, and valorization approach to the cultural site. So as already Nikos and the other mentioned, the importance of the community. So whatever we do here is also relevant to acknowledge the community, also to understand the community, because the community has a huge impact, also in terms of hazard, for example. And this here is a cycle of the community involvement, starting with inform to consulting, involve, collaborate, and empower. And what we are doing here today with the APAC Day is this. So to bring our work to you and to listen to your opinion and also your approach to the cultural heritage site. And also we would like to mention that Bogdan is busy.
He's busy.
So okay, I just mentioned that Bogdan also joined us last year during his master at the Cyprus Institute and work on the how to reach the local community, but also the pilgrim community through social media, especially through our website about Kalopanaiotis.
People always see different things when we look at the same object. And this is what we need to capture, because this is part of each one memories, but all these memories have to be brought together. And this is a very difficult task, but it's a very important one, because in this way we need to know what to preserve. Each one has a different, each one of us gives a different value to heritage. And this value is very subjective, of course, but it's not up to us to decide which values to preserve. And this is something that the community has to say. And this is exactly what we are trying to do here through this kind of documentation, but alongside the engagement of the community. So now you can go inside and you will see more details.
The massive roof that you see now standing above it, it's a much later addition, and it includes and it covers also the additions on the north side of the church, which was coming up to here. This is the first church. Then there was a second chapel dedicated to Saint Lampadistis to accommodate also his relic, and his relic, we will talk about, is right there. And then there was another chapel space, which is called the so-called Latin chapel, that was added even later to add additional space, which immediately tells us that this was a very popular pilgrimage site, and the monastic community running this place was in need of additional space. So primarily this church and the Latin chapel, because at some point the middle chapel was suffered a fire, collapsed, and then it was rebuilt. So we have only fragments of its wall paintings. But in here we have a wonderful kind of combination of primarily 13th century. There are fragments of some minor fragments of 11th, 12th century wall paintings in the sanctuary, but then primarily here we have mostly paintings from the 13th century, which are associated with stylistic traditions that look to the east. So this is most probably an artist that maybe came from Syria or Palestine. And primarily this concerns these images here, if you can begin to recognize the different styles. So in here, what you see here, entry to Jerusalem, the resurrection of Lazarus, Abraham, the sacrifice of Abraham, crucifixion, a huge representation of Archangel Michael, Saint Simeon sitting on a column, so Saint Heraclidius, which was the patron saint. You see how cartoonish almost this kind of style is, flat, two-dimensional. You have some details that also allow the artist to show off that he's aware of a little bit of depth, because you see how the donkey of carrying Christ is almost floating. Do you see it? I mean, it's not really standing on the same level with the other figures, but although you see the people of Jerusalem exiting Jerusalem to welcome Christ, they are dressed, with the contemporary clothes and attires of, let's say, 30th century population in Syria and Palestine. But later, and this is now in the 14th, 15th centuries, we have another painting cycle which covers most of this north and kind of eastern arm of the cross, because I forgot to mention that what I mean when I mean cross is square is this very typical Byzantine architectural style where there is a cross inscribed within a square. So we are standing here in a square nails. There are 4 pillars that support 4 arches that then support the base of the dome with the help of these triangular parts of the sphere that are called pendentives. And these pendentives there allow a short drum, which is part of the cylinder, and then there is the vaulting of the dome. And in terms of geometry, think about it. There is a sphere sitting within a cylinder, and then there is another sphere confining itself within a box, a square box. Okay? So, and this is the cross that we are talking about. So the wall paintings of the 14th century are these, and you see here again representations, much more populated scenes. You can see here the soldiers kind of leading Christ to the Golgotha, that are dressed like Latin crusaders, let's say, with that kind of armor from that particular period. So you have this kind of combination of different artists, different patrons coming in, offering new painting cycles. There was constant renewal in important pilgrimage places like this. There were the abbots of the monasteries in general throughout the Byzantine world did not hesitate to cover all painting cycles with new. This is how you kept your donors and your patrons interested and engaged in pouring money into your monastic institution. So they kept some parts of the 13th century, but then they added additional painting cycles. This is one of the oldest also iconostasis wooden in Cyprus, in one of these UNESCO churches. When you look closely, you will see even painted coat of arms of the Lusignan and other important families of Cyprus during the medieval period under Latin rule. And as a rule, I wanted to just mention to you that the art of Byzantine churches is also read in a hierarchical way. So from top to bottom, you always have Christ at the top. You have early Testament prophets and kings at the drum. You have then the evangelists in the pendentives, translating the Old Testament into the New Testament. Upper part of the church, cycles and scenes from the 12 feasts, from the life cycle of Christ, from the life cycle of the Virgin, from the life cycle of the patron saint. And then lower you have the standing saints that are almost participating with the people in the liturgy. So everything I've been telling you until now, as art historians, we usually study and date based on style. Our methodology is comparison. We compare, we identify stylistic details, is how good our eye is in comparing, making these comparisons. What our team has been doing, and this is where my colleague and one of our PhD candidates, Rafael Moreau, will contribute, is that now we have the capacity with advanced scientific methods to now analyze the materiality. So sometimes we test, sometimes we are successful, sometimes we realize that we were completely mistaken, because now we can apply and test these comparisons and those dating against material evidence. So what does it mean? And we actually have Rafael to talk to you a little bit about what we've been doing at this particular church now. So.
And we are able here to visualize, for example, the use of calcite. So it's a calcium-based pigment that are used for white. So you can see all the white dots. So it's we call this abundance map, where it's white, there's the occurrence of the specific elements. When it's dark, you have no elements, basically. So one thing you can say by looking at this whole image, it's like they're basically calcium everywhere, which is logical because this is the preparation surface, okay? And the ambers from Cyprus, also very known in the painting domain. So here you see that most of the pigment are also iron-based, and what's interesting is that you can by looking at them, you can also map them. So you have green earth for the green part, for a little bit of the, here you have like also line of red. Remember the red of the veil was vermilion, but we applied on top of this some red ochre. And this particular cross is also very brownish. That corresponds also to iron pigment. And this is also an interesting occurrence. It's the usage of lead white. So I mentioned before that we were using white pigment, what was calcite, but you can also see that here they use a different pigment for the white. So then you can question why this different usage for different parts. You can see that it was used, for example, here on the cross. So maybe this very specific usage for this has a meaning. This is all the question that will lead, that we'll try to answer with this kind of scientific analysis. Finally, we have green earth, and also we have a very interesting part here, which appears here, that we have like some restoration materials based on malachite and lithopone, so probably a mix of white pigment and greenish pigment. And we were able to see that those parts here were probably restored, because we also need to understand that this kind of place also has a usage as a religious cult. So there's also this questioning of the conservation and how it was restored. And that would be it for me.
One of the PhD students, like Rafa, at the APAC labs. And what I'm basically interested with the tree rings and the wood and the forest itself. Because you heard from the beginning that we have some questions that we ask about these monuments, these old UNESCO monuments are coming from Byzantine period, and we have different layers. And Sorin also mentioned different layers. But these layers sometimes raise some questions about the dates. We are using Rafa and XRF to understand different construction and painting periods, but also wood sometimes can help us about it. Because by counting the 3 rings, as you may all know, every ring has 1 year, we can actually understand different ages and the periods that these woods were reconstructed or just located in these churches. So therefore, with a recently started attempt of creating this chronology of Cyprus with Dendrochronology Laboratory with APAC, we try to understand how and when people were constructing this, regardless of typology that Nikos was telling, or the other chemical stuff. And we basically use 3 methodology that you can see here. One is taking core samples. So we have special drill that you can enter to the wood, and you can get some very tiny small core sample that they use for the ice cores as well in the archive. And then these samples has so many rings on it, and when by counting it, when cross-matching it, we can understand which period of the wood that we were sampling. Here is one example at the end I'm going to show you that we collected sample. And also another method that we were using is less minimally invasive method that we are telling is the scanning. So basically we just clear the base of the wood and we scan the 3 rings and we try to understand again the date. I'm not going to give all the details about the dates of each sample that we collected, but I'm just going to want to tell you a story of one of the choir chairs. So basically when we think about the wood, we only think about these great beams and which tell us stories, but also this portable wooden heritage, like choir chairs or icons also can tell us so many stories. And one of the choir chairs that we were sampling is just over there actually. We learned that first of all, there were 3 different tree species that they were using. So basically by looking at the tree ring underneath the microscope, we can understand what kind of tree they were using. There are 2 kinds of tree species specifically used in this monastery. One is black pine, Pinus nigra, and the other is the Calabrian pine, Pinus pruitia. Pinus pruitia is actually, if you just go out of the church, the first tree that you're going to see is the Pinus pruitia. And if you just hike a little bit, you're going to see the Pinus nigra. So basically what we see when in all periods, that I can tell from all periods we have wood here in the monastery, people were actually using the most accessible wood. And one of the choir chairs holds the whole story because one of the 2 beams on the back was actually Pinus nigra, which is high altitude, valuable tree. And from the bottom, we have the Pinus pruitia, which dates the 16th century. So throughout all these periods, people were keep using the same choir chairs and restoring it. And this is one of the examples that art historically, how much we can learn about different sections of the monastery. But also there's one more thing that I want to highlight before I finish, is also environment, because we also learn how was the forest back then. And this is also so valuable to understand how was the climate, how was the environment, and as I said, how people were using their environment and surrounding. And another colleague of mine just mentioned about the hazards. This is so interesting because fire is also one of the hazards, especially if you are in the middle of the forest. And by looking at the tree ring, we started to date different medieval and early historical, like 18th, 19th century forest fires. This was also interesting information that we can get, and we can actually connect all the historical hazards and also all historical natural environment with this cultural heritage, which I believe is important to just not look at these monasteries by as special monuments, which they are special monuments, but also their landscape are also as important as they are. So thank you very much for listening to me. And now I guess we're going to lead to another interesting story of graffitis.
The middle one, and this one is the Latin chapel. So within the history of the place, this became, after the death of St. John Lampadistis, the main focus of the cult, because, and then you can move later on this side, behind this pillar that you see here, there's actually the tomb of the saint. So there's this huge sarcophagus, And here in this niche is preserved the relics, that is the head of the saint. So it's like he's lying and the head is positioned as it should have been. So what we see here is something, of course, relevant because it's the main focus. As we heard before, it's a pilgrimage site. So beyond the visits for worshipping at the very beginning, Aios Heraclidion, then St. John Lampadistis entered and had a really powerful cult. I did not introduce myself, I'm sorry, I'm Mia Trentin, you saw me before. I'm an archaeologist and historian, and I'm specialized in written sources, mostly on graffiti. So my contribution to the study of the monument is beyond what my colleagues are doing, so studying the chemical composition and all the different parts to unveil the work of builders and painters that work here. I'm investigating people coming and worshipping the place. So I'm adding to the human dimension of the site, let's say. So I'm studying medieval graffiti, medieval and early modern graffiti that you can see are displayed all around the relics. What do graffiti tells us? First of all, graffiti are the mark of someone passing by a place. So I'm here and I feel a special connection with this place and I feel I want to leave a sign. Leaving a sign on the wall is leaving our presence. So why this area is so packed with graffiti? Because of course, placing any kind of message, placing a sign was asking for protection, but also ensuring to get protection, because if I write my name, it's like on the document. I put my presence, I set my presence there, and I'm constantly on the side of the saint. So I will benefit continuously about this. So across the century, and we had many visitors and pilgrims, mostly starting from the late 17th century and on. And the graffiti we have here are what we call devotional graffiti. So graffiti made specifically in relevant sacred position to ask for the protection of the saint. We have graffiti also in other places of the church with different meanings. Then outside you can have a look at the door, and there's dates and initials of people passing by and wanted to mark that I was here, so leaving their names. We have also in nearby where Mechan explained you, there's an inscription in French, possibly dated to the 16th century, of another visitor, so from France, that left his mark and his name on the wall to say that he was here again. So with graffiti we can recover not only the people and what were their perception and approach to the church, but also all the stories that are behind and all the people that actually contributed to make so relevant and important the site, because beyond the beautiful frescoes and the peculiar architecture, what keeps a site alive are the communities and the people passing, worshipping, or visiting the place. So in a certain sense, also you today that are standing here where centuries ago other people were passing by, and you are just enjoying the beauty of the place, but also its sacredness in a certain way. So something I wanted you to highlight, it's, so beyond, I will just put some light because it's not so, you see that it's really, really full of inscriptions. Some of them are realized with ink or pigment, some other are scratched directly on the plaster, on the gypsum. And there's one on this side, and if you move on this side, that is particularly important, is also highlight, let's say, from this really nice frame. And it's pretty famous in Cyprus, is a graffito left by Vasilis Grigorovich Barsky. He was a monk, a Ukrainian monk that started at the beginning in 1722 from Kiev. He was studying at the Theological Academy of Peter Mohila, and he decided at a certain point to do a sort of pilgrimage, a sort of grand tour but on a religious side. And he started from there, went across Eastern Europe, Italy, Greece, the Holy Land, and he passed through Cyprus 4 times. The last time he passed was between 1734 and 1736, and he left also during the 22 years of his trip across Europe, and Eastern Europe mostly. He left also a very detailed account and diary, and with also some drawings. He describes with really a lot of details and information, not only concerning the monuments, but also people, different views and attitudes of the region he passed by. And we know, of course, he passed by here, and here we have also his material sign. So we know it from the diary, but it's very different to have his handwriting here on the wall. There's other 4 sites in Cyprus that has his graffito. It's always more or less the date of each passage and his name in short text. And the important things for us studying graffiti is, for example, that he never mentioned on his diary that he's writing on the walls, as he's never mentioning when he does daily prayers or liturgies. So it's like we can see that graffiti is really a very intimate and personal way of expression and getting in touch with the monument. Something else very important concerning the graffiti of this place, and here I will put
Stelios is there.
Stelio. Okay. We are very lucky today because we have the experts. So most of these graffiti you see here are written in Greek, but when we tried to read them, it was impossible. It was impossible because they are actually written in Greek, but
in Turkish language. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Stelios Irakleous. I'm from the University of Cyprus. I'm here because we work with Nicolas Bagiritis on this graffiti. As Mia mentioned, Greek letters, Turkish language, written by pilgrims coming from Asia Minor. The majority of these graffiti are in Turkish, with some very few exceptions, like Barsky. You already heard about it. Okay, I imagine the Greek letters, Turkish language raises many questions, which we can answer later if you want. These people were Greek Orthodox, coming from Asia Minor, present-day Turkey, and they were passing by Cyprus en route to Jerusalem. So while they were trying to visit Jerusalem, they were coming through Cyprus because it was considered to be a very important pilgrimage site. What we haven't figured out yet is why they chose to leave their mark in this monastery. So we know they went by many places. Aios Mamas in Morphou, they passed from many villages until they ascend to Gikos Monastery. And then before start going downwards to a port to take the ship to the holy places, they were deciding to come here, which was actually a very difficult detour in their trip. Our first assumption that this seems to be proven with our research now, ongoing research, is that they slept in this section of the temple or somewhere here in search for cure for a disease or something else. And this is what they mention in their writings. So apart from name, village they come from, date, they sometimes mention that I slept here in search for a cure, or they mention the number of people in the group. There is somewhere, I cannot see it now, of course it's very dark, an inscription saying that about 30 people, men and women, we are heading to Jerusalem, and we made a stop to Agios Ioannis Lampadistis, and many more. We also know the dates Mia mentioned and their villages. Most of them come from what we know they were Turkish-speaking Greek Orthodox villages, mainly in Cappadocia and in the coast of Asia Minor opposite Cyprus. Some of them leave their mark on the way to Jerusalem and some of them coming from Jerusalem. So it was a Aleredu trip.
But I am another PhD candidate at the Cyprus Institute. I work in APAC labs with the rest of my colleagues here, and I'm an art historian by trade, but now I'm working on integrating art historical and technical methods of analysis so that we can really see a lot of the things that we've been talking about throughout the different stops on our tour, the integration of art and history and technology and science all coming together so that we can better understand the past and also preserve the present for the future. Okay, so if you had a look in the Latin chapel, that last chapel in the Church of St. John Lampadistis, you might have seen there's an icon on the wall that has a picture of St. John Lampadistis with these little scenes all around. And we have a second version right here. And so we've got the icon portrait, we call it, of St. John Lampadistis, and then these little narrative scenes that encircle and frame the icon. And so these scenes are actually little moments from the life of St. John Lampadistis, or the vita of the saint, and so we call this a vita icon because of that. And so St. John Lampadistis is really interesting because he's a local saint, he's a Cypriot saint. You won't find icons or monuments dedicated to Lampadistis anywhere but Cyprus. So already that's really interesting. But then we think about, okay, so this is a 13th century icon. So the first permanent structure we have at the site was the Church of St. Heraclidios in the 11th century. We know that the monastery started expanding past that around the 12th, 13th century. So then we have this vita icon of the patron saint of the whole complex being created in the 13th century. This is after the Byzantines had left the island. This is when the Crusaders, the Lusitanians, had control of the island. So it's interesting because that means that Orthodox tradition and Orthodox religion and culture was actually flourishing even well after the Byzantines had left the island and ceded control to another group. So we've been using this icon to really understand the early stages of the cult of St. John Lampadistis. And so what I've been doing mostly is, in addition to just having a look at the icon and analyzing each of these individual scenes closely, I've also been using infrared reflectographic analysis. And so that's, this machine right here is called an OSIRIS camera. And so what it does is it captures, when we have an infrared light, we shine the infrared light onto the icon, and then this machine captures the nature of the interaction between the infrared light and the surface of the icon. And so with those interactions, we're able to see really interesting things because materials are either reflected back, absorbed, or transmitted, and they all show up differently in the infrared analysis. So you'll see I have a few different images cycling through here. Any of the black and white ones are going to be those infrared images, and any color images are going to be just visible light images. But so you can see that we're able to have a look at just the fantastic detail in these little scenes that surround each of the Vita icons. And you can see that the artist is really interested in using this black outline to create really, really detailed little scenes. So these are really important, these little narrative scenes. But what's interesting is that the narratives of the life of St. John Lampadistis that circle the frame are actually different. So in the icon that's in the church right now, we have the birth of the saint's early life, his betrothal. He was actually poisoned by his ex-fiance's family. He went blind. It was a bad matchup. And so then he returns home. There are some miracles from before his death that are recorded. Then the saint dies. The saint is buried. There's the discovery of his relics, and then the relics themselves are moved to the Church of St. John Lampadistis, where they rest today. This icon, though, is different. We have the birth, the life, the miracles, the death, and the discovery of the relics, but we have these two scenes here that are totally different. So here we have this figure in red who's entering what is, we can read as the church space. And then here we have that same figure actually interacting with another figure in here. And so what previous scholars have identified is that this figure in red is actually the icon painter who was called to the church at the request of St. John Lampadistis' father, who asked a painter to come and paint an icon of the saint after his relics were moved to the church so that people could venerate both the relics and an icon of this new local saint. And here we have the saint painting the icon. And so I have a couple close-up images that will cycle through, but also feel free to come up and take a look. But you can see that this is an artist interacting with a figure that almost exactly mirrors this image of St. John Lampadistis in the center. So what we have here is the artist at work, which is really exciting. We don't have other images of artists working on icon paintings from this time in Cyprus and in general across the Byzantine medieval Mediterranean. Images of artists are very, very rare. So this is really interesting because now we have to wonder, who is this artist? Is this a self-portrait of the icon painter who worked on this very icon? Is it a painting of just a random icon painter who was working this tradition? We don't know, but we do know that this figure was not only represented here in this moment where he's called to the church to paint this icon, but through an infrared analysis, we were able to determine that this figure shows up in multiple other scenes in this version of the narrative of the life of St. John Lampadistis. So we have this figure of the artist present at the burial of St. John Lampadistis, at the discovery of his relics, and at the removal of his relics to the church of St. John Lampadistis, where they rest now. So in addition to this fascinating image of the artist, we also now have the artist really integrating himself into the narrative and the making of the cult of St. John Lampadistis. And so this is just absolutely fascinating. Right now I'm working on exploring more about artists and specific artistic practices in this part of Cyprus in the 13th century. And we're hoping to use this icon icon and others like it to explore more about the early history of St. John Lampadistis' cult and the activities at this church back in that time period. Thank you so much. And please feel free to wander. This is a beautiful icon treasury that has a bunch of icons from St. John Lampadistis, but also some other historic icons from churches in the area. So there are lots of treasures here. So please take a look and let me know if you have any questions.